she would serve tea to patients in the morning, clean wounds with gentle hands, and chat politely with her medical colleagues about supplies and treatments. But in the evenings, she sat in helicopter cockpits, flying the most dangerous rescue missions deep into enemy territory. For 2 years in Vietnam, no one knew her real identity, until that tattoo changed everything. Welcome to Silent Legends. Before we begin this story of hidden courage in the jungles of Vietnam, tell me in the comments from which city are you watching this video today? And if you believe legends like Dr. Sarah deserve to be remembered, subscribe to witness stories that time forgot, but history never will. The 3rd Surgical Hospital near Da Nang in 1968 was a maze of canvas tents and prefabricated buildings that served as the front line between life and death for American forces in Vietnam. The humid air carried the constant sound of helicopters bringing wounded soldiers from the jungle, their rotors beating a rhythm that had become the heartbeat of the war. Among the medical staff was Dr. Sarah Chen, a 28-year-old field surgeon who had arrived 6 months earlier with a Red Cross delegation. Officially, she was there to provide medical support to American forces and humanitarian aid to Vietnamese civilians. Her credentials showed medical training at Johns Hopkins, volunteer work in refugee camps, and the kind of steady competence that made her invaluable in a combat zone. Dr. Chen worked the morning shifts in the surgical ward, her small hands moving with precision as she treated everything from shrapnel wounds to tropical diseases. She spoke softly to patients, offered comfort to the dying, and maintained the kind of professional calm that helped others function under extreme stress. Her colleagues found her pleasant but unremarkable, exactly the sort of dedicated medical professional they expected from the Red Cross. She kept her black hair pulled back in a neat bun, wore standard medical scrubs under her Red Cross vest, and carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone whose life was devoted to healing. During breaks, she would sit with other medical staff, discussing supply shortages and the challenges of treating wounded soldiers so far from proper facilities. What none of them knew was that Dr. Sarah Chen was not her real name, and she had never worked for the Red Cross. Her actual name was Captain Sarah Rodriguez, and she was one of the most skilled helicopter pilots in the United States Air Force. For 3 years before arriving in Vietnam, she had been part of a classified program training pilots for the most dangerous rescue operations behind enemy lines. Her expertise lay not in surgery, but in flying UH-1 Huey helicopters into situations that other pilots considered suicidal. Sarah's cover as a Red Cross doctor allowed her to operate from the hospital while secretly conducting rescue missions that never appeared in official records. Each evening, after completing her medical duties, she would slip away to a hidden helicopter pad where a specially modified Huey waited under camouflage netting. The missions were always the same: American pilots shot down behind enemy lines, special operations teams trapped by Viet Cong forces, or reconnaissance teams that had gone silent in the jungle. These were rescues that required someone who could fly at treetop level through heavy ground fire, navigate by starlight through unmapped terrain, and land in spaces barely large enough for a helicopter's rotor disc. Sarah's medical knowledge, though learned quickly to maintain her cover, actually proved invaluable during rescue operations. She could provide emergency treatment to wounded personnel during extraction, keeping them alive during the dangerous flight back to base. Her dual expertise made her uniquely qualified for missions that combined medical emergency with combat aviation. The psychological strain of maintaining this double life was enormous. During the day, Sarah had to project the calm compassion of a healer while secretly preparing for night missions that required the aggressive precision of a combat pilot. She had to show appropriate concern for wounded soldiers while concealing the fact that she might have been the pilot who rescued them from the jungle just hours before. But Sarah understood the larger purpose of her mission. American forces in Vietnam were losing pilots and special operations personnel at a rate that threatened critical missions throughout Southeast Asia. Conventional rescue operations were often too slow or too visible, allowing enemy forces to capture or kill downed personnel before help could arrive. Sarah's unofficial rescue operations had already saved dozens of lives, but her existence had to remain completely secret. If the North Vietnamese discovered that the Americans were conducting covert rescue missions using medical personnel as cover, it could prompt attacks on legitimate medical facilities and endanger humanitarian operations throughout the region. The crisis that would expose Sarah's true identity began with a mission that went catastrophically wrong in the mountains near the DMZ. The emergency call came at 0347 hours on March 15, 1968. A reconnaissance team operating near the demilitarized zone had been ambushed by a large Viet Cong force and was trapped on a hillside with multiple casualties. Conventional rescue operations were impossible, the area was too heavily defended, and daylight evacuation would result in the rescue aircraft being shot down. Colonel Williams, the base commander, received the distress call in his quarters and immediately understood that this was exactly the kind of situation that required Sarah's unique capabilities. But reaching her without exposing her cover presented a challenge that had never been faced before. The medical compound where Sarah worked was under constant observation by other personnel, and her sudden disappearance during a medical emergency would raise questions. Colonel Williams needed a way to extract her from her medical duties without arousing suspicion, while also maintaining the security protocols that protected her real identity. The solution came when Sarah herself appeared at the colonel's office at 0430 hours. She had been monitoring military radio frequencies from her quarters, a practice that would have seemed suspicious for a Red Cross doctor but was essential for her real mission. "Colonel," Sarah said quietly, after ensuring they were alone. "I heard the emergency transmission. How many personnel need extraction?" Williams looked up from the tactical map spread across his desk. 6 men trapped on Hill 847. Multiple casualties, heavy enemy contact. It's too hot for conventional rescue. Sarah studied the maps, her mind automatically calculating flight paths, fuel requirements, and extraction procedures. What's the enemy strength? Intelligence estimates at least 40 Viet Cong, possibly more. They've got the high ground and good cover. Any rescue attempt would be flying into a kill zone. Sarah traced the route with her finger. Night extraction using NOE flight profile. I can get them out. Williams hesitated. Sarah's rescue operations had always been conducted with utmost secrecy, but this mission would require coordination with other military units and couldn't be hidden from the larger base personnel. "Doctor, if we proceed with this, your cover might be compromised. Other people will need to know about the mission." Sarah considered this. For 8 months, she had successfully maintained her identity as Dr. Chen while conducting rescue operations that saved American lives. But 6 soldiers were trapped in enemy territory, and conventional rescue attempts would likely result in their deaths along with the deaths of any rescue crews. "Colonel, those men won't survive until dawn. If there's a chance to save them, we have to take it." Williams nodded. "What do you need?" "Medical emergency that requires my immediate departure from the base. Something that would justify a Red Cross doctor taking a helicopter to a forward medical station." Williams thought for a moment. "We received reports of civilian casualties from a village near the DMZ. Officially, you're responding to a humanitarian emergency that requires immediate medical attention." It was a plausible cover story, but Sarah knew that conducting a rescue mission under the guise of a medical evacuation would require her to reveal flying skills that Dr. Chen wasn't supposed to possess. At 0500 hours, Sarah reported to the helicopter pad in her Red Cross uniform, carrying a medical bag that contained trauma supplies but also concealed military communication equipment and navigation tools. The Huey that waited for her was the same aircraft she had been using for covert missions, but now it would be flying with a flight plan that other personnel could observe. The plan was simple: fly to the reported location of civilian casualties, conduct the rescue of the trapped reconnaissance team under cover of a medical evacuation, and return to base with both the rescued soldiers and any actual civilian casualties they might encounter. But as Sarah began her pre-flight procedures, she realized that her medical cover was about to be tested in ways she hadn't anticipated. Captain Morrison, the base operations officer, approached as she was checking the helicopter's systems. "Dr. Chen, I have to ask, do you have flight experience? This mission will require navigation through hostile territory at night." Sarah looked up from her checklist. "I have basic helicopter orientation training. Enough to assist the pilot with navigation and emergency procedures." Morrison frowned. "What pilot? You're listed as the sole occupant on this flight plan." Sarah felt her cover beginning to unravel. In her urgency to organize the rescue mission, she and Colonel Williams had overlooked the obvious question of who would actually fly the helicopter. "Captain, there must be some mistake. I assumed a pilot would be assigned to this mission." Morrison checked his paperwork. All available pilots are either on other missions or grounded for maintenance. The colonel specifically approved you for this flight as pilot in command. Sarah realized that Colonel Williams had made a calculated decision to expose her flying abilities rather than abandon the trapped reconnaissance team. But doing so would raise questions about how a Red Cross doctor had acquired military helicopter pilot qualifications. "Captain, I need to speak with Colonel Williams immediately." "Ma'am, those soldiers don't have time for administrative discussions. The enemy situation is deteriorating rapidly." Sarah looked at the helicopter, then at the maps showing the location of the trapped team. 6 American soldiers were depending on her, and every minute of delay reduced their chances of survival. She made the decision that would change everything. "Captain Morrison, I'm qualified to fly this mission. But what I'm about to tell you is classified, and you'll need to report it through proper channels." Morrison's expression shifted from confusion to attention. "Ma'am? My name is not Dr. Sarah Chen. I'm Captain Sarah Rodriguez, United States Air Force, and I've been conducting classified rescue operations from this base for the past 8 months. The words hung in the humid air between them. Morrison stared at her for a long moment, processing the implications of what she had just revealed. "Captain Rodriguez, if that's true, you need to provide authentication codes." Sarah reached into her medical bag and withdrew a sealed envelope that she had hoped never to open. Inside were her actual military identification and authorization codes for the classified rescue program. Morrison examined the documents under a flashlight, his expression growing increasingly serious. "These codes check out. But this means 6 soldiers are still trapped on Hill 847, and I'm the only pilot available to extract them." Morrison looked at the helicopter, then back at Sarah. "Captain, this is way above my security clearance. But those men need help now. Then let's go get them." As Sarah completed her pre-flight procedures, word of the emergency spread through the base with the speed that military communications achieve during crisis situations. Within minutes, key personnel knew that Dr. Chen was not who she appeared to be, and that the quiet Red Cross doctor was actually a classified military pilot conducting a rescue mission. The revelation created immediate complications. Medical staff who had worked alongside Sarah for months were confused and concerned. If Dr. Chen was actually a military pilot, what about her medical qualifications? Had she been providing legitimate medical care, or had wounded soldiers been treated by someone without proper training? Colonel Williams found himself fielding urgent questions from his staff while trying to maintain operational security around Sarah's actual mission. The truth was that Sarah did possess basic medical training, enough to maintain her cover and provide emergency care during rescue operations, but she was not a qualified surgeon. "Sir," Major Thompson, the chief medical officer, confronted Williams in his office. "If Dr. Chen has been operating under false credentials, we need to review every medical procedure she's performed. This could be a matter of life and death." Williams had been dreading this conversation. "Major, Captain Rodriguez has medical training sufficient for field emergency care. Any surgical procedures she performed were supervised by qualified personnel." "Captain Rodriguez? Sir, who is Captain Rodriguez?" Williams realized that the entire medical staff would need to be briefed on Sarah's real identity, which would compromise the security of her previous rescue operations. Meanwhile, Sarah was dealing with her own crisis of identity as she prepared for what might be her final rescue mission. For 8 months, she had successfully compartmentalized her roles as healer and combat pilot. Now, flying openly as a military rescue pilot, she felt the psychological strain of abandoning the persona that had protected her. The flight to Hill 847 took 43 minutes, following a route that kept the helicopter below radar coverage while avoiding known enemy positions. Sarah flew without lights, using night vision equipment and terrain features to navigate through the mountainous jungle terrain. As she approached the area where the reconnaissance team was trapped, Sarah could see muzzle flashes lighting up the hillside. The Viet Cong forces had the Americans pinned down in a small clearing, and the intensity of fire suggested that the enemy was preparing for a final assault. Sarah established radio contact with the team leader, Staff Sergeant Martinez, who had been coordinating the team's defense while treating 2 seriously wounded soldiers. Angel Flight, this is Recon 6. We are taking heavy fire from 3 directions. 2 urgent surgical, 4 ambulatory. Landing zone is compromised. Sarah studied the terrain through her night vision equipment. The clearing where the team was trapped was barely large enough for a helicopter, surrounded by tall trees that would make approach and departure extremely dangerous under fire. Recon 6, Angel Flight. I see your position. Prepare for dust-off in 2 minutes. Mark your position with infrared strobe. Angel Flight, be advised landing zone is under direct fire. Recommend you abort and wait for daylight support. Sarah knew that daylight support would come too late. The wounded soldiers needed immediate medical attention, and the enemy force was preparing for an assault that the small reconnaissance team couldn't survive. Recon 6, negative on abort. Prepare for immediate extraction. What followed was one of the most dangerous helicopter operations of the Vietnam War. Sarah brought the Huey in at treetop level, using the terrain to mask her approach until the last possible moment. As she flared for landing, automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions around the clearing. The helicopter took hits in the tail rotor and main transmission, but Sarah maintained control while the reconnaissance team ran toward the aircraft carrying their wounded. In less than 90 seconds, all 6 soldiers were aboard, but the helicopter was severely damaged and struggling to maintain altitude. Angel Flight to base, 6 passengers aboard, aircraft damaged, requesting immediate medical support on arrival. As Sarah fought to keep the crippled helicopter airborne, she realized that her medical knowledge was about to be tested in the most critical way possible. One of the wounded soldiers was losing blood rapidly, and the flight back to base would take over 30 minutes. Working with one hand while flying with the other, Sarah began emergency medical treatment using supplies from her medical bag. Her training as Dr. Chen, though hastily acquired, proved sufficient to stabilize the wounded soldier long enough to reach the base hospital. The landing at Da Nang was witnessed by dozens of personnel who had gathered after hearing radio reports of the rescue mission. As Sarah shut down the damaged helicopter and helped medical teams evacuate the wounded soldiers, she realized that her double life was permanently over. Colonel Williams met her at the landing pad, accompanied by Major Thompson and several other senior officers who had been briefed on her real identity. Captain Rodriguez, Williams said formally, outstanding work. All 6 personnel extracted alive. The use of her real name and rank in front of other personnel felt strange after months of being Dr. Chen. Sarah removed her helmet and ran her hand through her hair, feeling the weight of maintaining her medical persona finally lifting from her shoulders. Thank you, sir. Aircraft took multiple hits but remained flyable. Maintenance will need to assess damage before next mission. Major Thompson stepped forward. Captain, I owe you an apology. I questioned your medical qualifications without understanding the full situation. Sarah looked at the medical officer who had worked alongside her for months without knowing her real identity. Major, my medical training was sufficient for emergency care, but I'm not a qualified surgeon. Any procedures I performed should be reviewed by properly trained personnel. Captain, I've reviewed your medical work over the past 8 months. While your credentials were unconventional, your patient care was exemplary. You may not be a surgeon, but you're a hell of a field medic. The successful rescue of the reconnaissance team created a crisis that extended far beyond the 3rd Surgical Hospital. Within hours, reports of the mission had reached military headquarters in Saigon, where senior officers were demanding answers about how a Red Cross doctor had conducted a military rescue operation using classified helicopter assets. The problem was compounded by the fact that Sarah's previous rescue missions, though successful, had never been officially documented. For 8 months, American personnel had been saved by operations that didn't exist on paper, conducted by a pilot whose identity was known only to a handful of people. General Patterson, the commanding officer for military operations in South Vietnam, arrived at Da Nang the following morning to personally investigate the situation. Sarah found herself in the unprecedented position of briefing a 3-star general on rescue operations that were supposed to be completely deniable. Captain Rodriguez, Patterson began, studying the mission reports that had been hastily compiled overnight. According to these documents, you've conducted 17 rescue missions over the past 8 months, saving 43 American personnel. Yet there's no record of these operations in official files. Sarah sat at attention in the base conference room, still wearing her flight suit from the previous night's mission. Sir, the missions were conducted under a classified program designed to maintain plausible deniability. Official documentation would have compromised operational security. And your cover as a Red Cross doctor? Essential for basing operations out of a medical facility without arousing enemy suspicion, sir. General Patterson studied Sarah for a long moment. Captain, what you've accomplished is remarkable. But conducting military operations under humanitarian cover violates several international agreements. If word of this reaches the press or enemy intelligence, it could compromise legitimate medical operations throughout the region. Sarah understood the implications. Her rescue missions had saved American lives, but they had also potentially endangered every legitimate medical worker in Vietnam. Sir, I understand the concerns. What are your orders? Patterson exchanged glances with Colonel Williams before responding. Captain, the rescue program is being officially terminated. Your cover has been compromised, and continuing operations would pose unacceptable risks to humanitarian personnel. Sarah nodded. She had known this day would come eventually, but the timing was particularly difficult. Intelligence reports suggested that enemy forces were planning increased operations against American units, which would likely result in more personnel requiring rescue. However, Patterson continued, your skills are too valuable to waste. I'm authorizing the creation of an official rescue squadron, with you as the operations officer. The missions will be the same, but they'll be conducted openly as military operations. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Operating openly as a military pilot would eliminate the psychological strain of maintaining a false identity, but it would also make rescue operations more dangerous as enemy forces adapted to counter official rescue attempts. Sir, what about the medical staff who worked with me? They believed they were working alongside a qualified doctor. Major Thompson, who had been listening to the briefing, spoke up. General, Captain Rodriguez provided medical care under my supervision. While her credentials were unusual, her patient care met military medical standards. I'm recommending her for additional medical training to formalize her qualifications. Patterson nodded approvingly. Excellent. Captain Rodriguez, you'll be assigned to the new rescue squadron while completing advanced medical training. Your combination of flying and medical skills makes you uniquely qualified for combat rescue operations. As the briefing concluded, Sarah realized that her 8 months as Dr. Chen had not been wasted. The medical knowledge she had acquired to maintain her cover had become a genuine qualification that would make her more effective in her real mission of saving lives. But first, she had to face the medical staff who had worked alongside her without knowing her real identity. The meeting with the hospital personnel was awkward and emotional. Nurses and doctors who had considered Dr. Chen a colleague and friend struggled to understand how the quiet Red Cross doctor had actually been a military pilot conducting secret missions. Dr. Chen. I mean, Captain Rodriguez, Nurse Williams said hesitantly. Did you ever actually care about the patients, or was it all just an act? Sarah had been dreading this question. Every patient I treated mattered to me. The medical work wasn't just cover, it was real. I may not have been a qualified surgeon, but I cared about every person I tried to help. But you lied to us for 8 months. Yes, I did. And I understand if you feel betrayed. But the mission required complete secrecy, and maintaining that secret saved American lives. Dr. Harrison, the chief surgeon, had been quietly observing the discussion. Captain, I've reviewed your medical work over the past 8 months. While your training was unconventional, your instincts were sound and your patient care was compassionate. You may have been living a lie, but you were also saving lives in ways we never knew about. The conversation continued for over an hour, with medical staff asking questions about Sarah's real background, her previous military service, and her plans for the future. Gradually, the anger and confusion gave way to something approaching understanding. Captain, Nurse Williams said finally, I still don't fully understand why you had to deceive us. But if you saved 43 American soldiers, then maybe the deception was worth it. The official establishment of the 41st Rescue Squadron took place 2 weeks later, with Captain Sarah Rodriguez as the operations officer and primary pilot. The squadron's mission was identical to her previous covert operations, but now conducted openly as military rescue missions with full support and documentation. Sarah's first official mission came within days of the squadron's activation. A fighter pilot had been shot down near the Cambodian border, and conventional rescue attempts had failed due to heavy enemy presence in the area. The mission was exactly the kind of operation Sarah had been conducting secretly for months, but now she flew with official authorization and military support. The rescue was successful, but Sarah immediately noticed the difference between covert and official operations. Enemy forces, now aware that American rescue helicopters operated in the area, had adapted their tactics to counter rescue attempts. What had once been dangerous missions conducted in relative secrecy were now extremely hazardous operations against prepared enemy positions. Over the following months, Sarah conducted 23 official rescue missions, saving 67 American personnel. But the cost was higher than during her covert operations. 2 helicopters were shot down, and 3 crew members were killed in crashes caused by enemy fire. Sarah found herself questioning whether the transition from covert to official operations had been worth the increased casualties. The lives saved were real and valuable, but the price paid by rescue crews was also real. The answer came during a mission in September 1968, when Sarah and her crew rescued a 8-man special operations team that had been trapped behind enemy lines for 3 days. Among the rescued personnel was Lieutenant James Patterson, the son of the general who had terminated Sarah's covert program. Captain Rodriguez, the young officer, said as they flew back to base, "My father told me about your previous missions. The unofficial ones. He said you saved 43 people before anyone knew who you really were." Sarah focused on flying while responding. "That's correct, Lieutenant." He also said that ending those covert missions was the hardest decision he'd ever made as a commanding officer. Sarah glanced back at the wounded officer. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because he wanted you to know that every life you saved, official or unofficial, mattered. And that the transition to official operations, despite the increased risks, was necessary to protect humanitarian workers throughout Vietnam." Sarah understood. Her covert rescue missions had been successful, but they had also created a security risk that could have endangered legitimate medical personnel. The transition to official operations had increased the danger for rescue crews, but it had also protected the broader humanitarian mission in Vietnam. Sarah completed her tour in Vietnam in early 1969, having conducted 40 official rescue missions in addition to her 17 covert operations. Her medical training, originally acquired to maintain cover, had proven invaluable in treating wounded personnel during extraction operations. After returning to the United States, Sarah was assigned to the Aerospace Rescue and Recovery Service, where she helped develop training programs for combat rescue operations. Her unique experience as both a pilot and field medic influenced rescue procedures that would be used for decades. In 1975, Sarah retired from active duty with the rank of major, but continued working as a civilian contractor training rescue pilots. Her methods, developed during months of maintaining a dual identity in Vietnam, emphasized the importance of medical knowledge for rescue personnel. Sarah never discussed her time as Dr. Chen publicly, maintaining the secrecy that had protected her covert missions. But in 1995, 27 years after her service in Vietnam, she received a letter that brought her story full circle. The letter was from Dr. Harrison, the chief surgeon who had worked alongside her at the 3rd Surgical Hospital. He wrote, "Major Rodriguez, I wanted you to know that the medical techniques you demonstrated during your time as Dr. Chen influenced our treatment protocols for trauma patients. Several procedures you developed for treating wounded soldiers in helicopter environments became standard practice throughout military medicine. Your dual expertise saved lives in ways that went far beyond your rescue missions." Sarah kept the letter as a reminder that her 8 months of living as someone else had created value that extended beyond the immediate mission. The medical knowledge she had acquired to maintain her cover had become genuine expertise that helped save lives for years afterward. Major Sarah Rodriguez died in 2018 at the age of 78, her obituary describing her as a decorated rescue pilot who had served with distinction in Vietnam. No mention was made of her time as Dr. Chen, her months of covert rescue operations, or the dual identity that had saved dozens of American lives. But among her personal effects, her family found a worn Red Cross identification card bearing the name Dr. Sarah Chen, along with medical notes written in her handwriting and photographs of her working in the 3rd Surgical Hospital. Only then did they understand the full scope of her service in Vietnam. In 2019, the Air Force officially declassified records of covert rescue operations conducted in Vietnam between 1967 and 1969. For the first time, Sarah's 17 unofficial missions were acknowledged, along with the 43 lives she had saved while operating under false identity. The declassification revealed that Sarah had been part of a highly classified program that placed rescue pilots in humanitarian organizations throughout Southeast Asia. The program had saved hundreds of American lives but had been terminated due to concerns about endangering legitimate humanitarian workers. Colonel Williams, who had coordinated Sarah's covert missions, wrote in his memoir, "Major Rodriguez represented the best of American military service. She was willing to sacrifice her own identity, live as someone else for months, and risk her life repeatedly to save fellow Americans. Her courage went far beyond flying dangerous missions. It extended to the psychological strength required to maintain a false identity while never forgetting her real mission." Today, the rescue techniques developed by Sarah Rodriguez are still taught at military survival schools. Her emphasis on medical training for rescue personnel became standard practice, saving countless lives in conflicts around the world. But perhaps Sarah's most important legacy lies in the example she set of someone willing to become whoever the mission required. For 8 months in Vietnam, she was Dr. Sarah Chen, a compassionate healer who comforted the wounded and provided hope in a war zone. For the rest of her career, she was Major Sarah Rodriguez, a decorated rescue pilot who saved lives through skill, courage, and determination. Both identities were real, both served essential purposes, and both demonstrated that true heroism sometimes requires hiding your greatest achievements from those you're protecting. The story of Sarah Rodriguez reminds us that the most important battles are often fought by people whose names never appear in history books. They take on false identities, live as someone else for months or years, and risk everything to protect others. In the end, it doesn't matter what name they use or what identity they project. What matters is the lives they save when no one knows who they really are. Have you known someone whose greatest service was hidden from those around them? Someone who lived as someone else to protect others? Share their story in the comments. Thank you for watching Silent Legends. If this story moved you, subscribe and help us honor those who were never meant to be forgotten.